Hello and welcome. I'm Asima Katauka and you are watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories. US President Donald Trump has said that a decision on Russian oil sanctions will be made following today's scheduled meeting between Steve Witkoff and Russian leadership in Moscow. The US State Department has confirmed Witkoff's visit, marking a rare high-level engagement amid escalating tensions. The United Nations has expressed deep concern over media reports that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu favors a full military takeover of Gaza, warning that such an expansion could have catastrophic consequences. An Israeli minister blamed foreign critics for prolonging the war, while US President Donald Trump refused to state his position on the possible takeover. US President Donald Trump has said that Vice President J.D. Vance is most likely his heir apparent for the 2028 Republican presidential nomination, marking his strongest endorsement yet of Vance's future candidacy. President Trump indicated to reporters that Vance's position as vice president makes him the natural successor to lead his political movement. Today marks 80 years since the US dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima, Japan, killing around 140,000 people as global nuclear tensions rise. With a silent prayer at 8:15 a.m. local time, the exact moment the US B-29 Enola Gay dropped Little Boy in 1945, killing around 140,000 people. Russia and China will conduct joint naval patrols in the Asia-Pacific region following recent military drills in the Sea of Japan. According to Interfax, the Russian Pacific Fleet confirmed that naval crews from both countries will form a new task group for this mission, signaling deepening military cooperation. South Korean prosecutors interrogated former First Lady Kim Kyung-hee over stock manipulation, bribery, and election law violations, with an arrest warrant expected to follow. If granted, it would mark the first time in South Korean history that both a former President Yoon Suk-yeol, impeached over martial law declaration, and First Lady are both arrested. Sean Diddy Combs, who faces sentencing in October for prostitution-related charges, is now seeking a presidential pardon from President Donald Trump. According to his lawyer, his legal team argues that Combs deserves clemency due to his public contributions and rehabilitation efforts. Australia's online watchdog has accused tech giants including Apple and Google of turning a blind eye to child sexual abuse material. The regulator warned that these platforms are failing to protect children online despite having the technological means to do so. US envoy Steve Witkoff has landed in Moscow and greeted by Putin's envoy Dmitry Peskov, according to reports. This comes after the US State Department confirmed that Witkoff will be in Moscow to meet with the Russian leadership. Here's what the State Department had to say.
First of all, the President has noted, of course, that Special Envoy Witkoff will be traveling to Russia this week, so we can confirm that from this podium. What that will entail, I have no details for you. When it comes to, clearly the President's not happy with Mr. Putin and Russia, but he remains committed to diplomatic solutions. I would say that we've also seen a remark, perhaps a reflection of possible secondary sanctions regarding the sale of oil, people who are countries that are buying Russian oil, and that has been openly discussed by the President. But when it comes to things that are decided, we would wait for the President.
This comes as the US President said that he will make a decision on whether to sanction countries who purchase Russian oil after a meeting with Russian officials scheduled for August 6th. Moreover, Trump, who has reportedly signaled frustration with Kremlin leader Vladimir Putin in recent weeks, has given him until August 8th to make progress towards peace in Ukraine or face tougher sanctions. Here's what the U.S. president had to say.
But we'll be doing quite a bit of that. We'll see what happens over the next fairly short period of time. But we'll see what happens. Yep. You know, they have a meeting tomorrow. We have a meeting with Russia tomorrow. We're going to see what happens. We'll make that determination at that time.
Now for this discussion, we're joined by Madhav Nalapat. He's the editorial director at the Sunday Guardian. Joins us live from New Delhi. Thank you, Madhav Nalapat, for joining us today. Good to see you. Now, what is the significance of U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff's visit to Moscow, especially given the context of ongoing tensions? And also, can we expect any breakthrough from this?
Well, I doubt there'll be a breakthrough. I think Putin has gone too far and invested too much of blood and treasure in Ukraine to stop short of fulfilling his objectives. So I don't think Trump's threat is going to make much difference. And anyway, the fact is Russia is already very heavily sanctioned by the United States. Frankly, any additional sanctions are, just adding on to the huge pile of sanctions already endured by Russia. So having gone through so much of pain, I don't think Vladimir Putin is going to hold back until he achieves his objectives in Ukraine, which is a complete demilitarization and neutralization of Ukraine. So I am very skeptical of any peace agreement being reached in the immediate future.
And Madhav Nalapat, given that President Trump has set a date for August 8th deadline for Russia to make progress towards peace in Ukraine, how do you think Russia will respond to this ultimatum?
Look, first of all, he said 50 days, and now he said a few days, 8th August. 8th August is right next door, frankly. And you can't keep changing deadlines in this manner and expect the other country to take those deadlines seriously. I mean, he's brought it forward once, he could bring it back again to what it was tomorrow. So the reality is, 8th August is too short a period and frankly too short a deadline. And secondly, that keep on changing deadlines in a matter as serious as the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, where Ukraine is being completely assisted by NATO and is now using US weapons, of course, sold at cost to Ukraine through money received from the Europeans. So quite frankly, for Donald Trump, this is a profitable business for the United States. He's selling money. He's getting money for the sale of his weapons to Ukraine. And the Europeans are paying the bill. So quite honestly, there's no real incentive on either side to have a quick ceasefire.
And now, what could this mean for U.S. and Russia's relationship going forward?
Look, the relationship is at rock bottom. How far do you go after rock bottom? There's nowhere else to go. So the relationship is already right at rock bottom. There was an initial belief that, during the Biden presidency, after the end of the Biden presidency, that there would be a revival in relations. Frankly, that makes geopolitical sense because China is really the main adversary. I mean, and I think you have the distinguished Dr. Taniguchi on your panel. From what I can see, a highly distinguished scholar, he will agree with me that the real problem is with China and the South China and the Chinese attempt to control, first of all, the one half of the Indo-Pacific and the other half later. So from that point of view, frankly, this very close alliance between Russia and China, which has been created by the Ukraine war, is not doing any services to any democracy, whether the US or Japan or India or France or any of those countries that are cheerleading for Ukraine. So again, very honestly, in my personal view, the attention of the United States need to shift to the Indo-Pacific, need to shift from Russia to China, and if a peace deal is reached, that can be done. But as of now, the peace deal seems quite far distant.
And Madhav, since you've mentioned China already, if these sanctions are implemented, do you think this will push Russia closer to China and India closer to Russia?
Look, as far as India closer to Russia is concerned, well, I'm not very sure about that because India and China, as you know, are adversaries. The Chinese have been very aggressive towards us. We are the only country to have lost lives in combat against the Chinese after 1979, the Vietnam invasion of theirs, which didn't end too well for them. And quite frankly, we see them as an adversary. And now we have been having, for example, military drills with the Philippines. It's got its own problems over the Paracel Islands with China. China, when it wants something, it says it's Chinese and just grabs it. Now, that's not valid international behavior. So they wanted the Paracel, so they just grabbed it from the Philippines. It's as a weaker power. That's not fair at all. And from that point of view, the Philippines is naturally very unhappy with China. And again, from that point of view, I think it's important for President Trump to understand that the adversary is China. His initial track of trying to mend fences with Russia was the right track, and his diversion from that track, I don't know who are the whisperers in his ear who got him to diverge from that track, but by doing so, he is compromising U.S. interests, compromising U.S. security interests, which frankly are heavily concentrated in the Indo-Pacific, as the Defense Secretary Hegseth will tell you, as others will tell you in the U.S. Security team. The real threat now is now developing in the Indo-Pacific and is developing from China. So I think President Trump should go back to his original track of trying to ensure that the Russia-China alliance shows some kind of separation. Of course, some people are not going to like this, including, for example, Japan, which has got terrible memories of Russia. But the reality of the situation is that's what geopolitical need requires. But I doubt that's going to happen. As far as President Trump is concerned, it's very difficult to predict. The one thing you can predict safely about him is completely unpredictable. So as far as he's concerned, I don't know what he's going to decide. But very frankly, the main threat is in the Indo-Pacific, and the main threat is from China. Actually, President Trump during his campaign had got that very well, very clearly. And suddenly, 6 months into his presidency, he seems to have completely reversed course. I think he should go back to his original position he took as a candidate and won the election, and frankly promised voters who voted for him on the basis of the promises he made during the campaign, part of which was to stand up to China and secure the Indo-Pacific together with friendly powers, that is India. He has certain secondary sanctions on India as well. That makes no sense. You can't bracket India with China. It makes no sense at all. The Indians are a partner, the Chinese are an adversary. So very honestly, I mean, speaking as somebody who has frankly had a lot of regard for President Trump back in 2015 at the USI, United Service Institution of India, a military institution, I predicted that Trump would be the next president before he had even declared his candidacy. I would like to see him come back to being the original Trump. And the sooner he does that, the better, I think, for all the democracies.
Thank you, Madhav Nalapat, for joining us and sharing that insight. Please stay with us as we come back to you for our next discussion as well. Now we move on. U.S. President Donald Trump on Tuesday has declined to say whether he supports or opposes a potential Israeli takeover of the entire Gaza Strip. This comes as Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has reportedly come out in favor of the idea of taking control of the entire enclave. When asked by reporters if President Trump would support such a plan, he said that it was going to be up to Israel. He added that his primary focus on feeding Gazans and said that Israel and Arab states would help with distribution and funding. Additionally, on being asked by a journalist whether he had seen the Hamas video of emaciated Israeli hostage Aviatar David being forced to dig his own grave, here's what Trump said.
I have, yeah. I have. I think it's horrible. I think it's horrible. And I hope a lot of people do get to see it, as bad as it is, because I think it's a horrible.
Now we go back to our guest discussion with Madhav Nalapat. He's an editorial director at the Sunday Guardian. Thank you, Madhav Nalapat, for staying with us. Now, what are the implications of President Trump's ambiguous stance on this potential Israeli takeover of Gaza? What should we make of this?
Well, quite frankly, he has been very clear he wants Gaza to be some kind of a Riviera in that part of the world. I'm not sure how. It's not going to be easy, to put it very mildly, for that to happen. And even for Israel to occupy Gaza is frankly going to be a very difficult proposition. And I personally believe that it will be a proposition very costly in precious Israeli lives. I mean, one thing I agree with President Trump, it's a most this is a horrible video that was shown, and it revives memories of the Holocaust. The horrible wiping out of the Jewish people by the Nazis, led by Hitler. And frankly, this is why Israel believes it's in an existential conflict against Hamas. Any organization that shows this kind of that makes somebody do this, it's first of all the kind of malnourishment that the person is obviously suffering from. And secondly, digging his own grave brings back memories of 1930s and 1940s, early 1940s Germany. And that's why it's no wonder the Israelis are going full tilt at Hamas. I mean, they want at least the military wing to be completely destroyed before the Jewish people feel safe. And I'd like to say that Hamas, if you go by its printed literature, if you go by its the videos of its leaders, you will see that they want the destruction not only of the Jewish state, but of the entire Jewish people. They don't want the Jewish people on earth. Now, again, that goes back to the previous century and to the mentality that caused the Holocaust. Anyway, I mean, the Arab states have very correctly said of Hamas, they should relinquish power. The Arab states, most of them are very sensible. Many of them they're very moderate, and overall they're a credit to the region. But I mean, as far as Hamas is concerned, it doesn't belong in any category of acceptable ruling systems or ruling parties. So I think that video illustrates very clearly why Benjamin Netanyahu believes it's an existential conflict and why he's going full tilt at Hamas. The only point is he should not do it in ways that basically put a lot of Israeli lives at risk. There aren't that many Jewish people in the world, and the few there are should be, as far as possible, protected, and their lives should be protected. So from that point of view, I don't think it's a practical proposition to occupy the whole of Gaza. I don't think so. But I mean, making it a Riviera, even less practical. But having said that, this kind of a video shows precisely why most Israelis now are supporting this war on Hamas, because they recognize the existential nature of the conflict. And again, I go back to what I said. Hamas is opposed to not only the state of Israel, but to the Jewish people itself. And remember that thought? It was there,
Madam Nalapat, sorry, we are running out of time for this discussion. Please stay with us, and thank you for sharing that. Now we'll go back to him for our next discussion. Israeli Foreign Minister Gideon Sa'ar addressed the press that at the United Nations ahead of the Security Council meeting he initiated to spotlight the hostage crisis in Gaza. He called for the immediate and unconditional release of all remaining hostages held by Hamas and Islamic Jihad. describing their treatment as starvation, torture, and deliberate cruelty, comparing the acts of those of the Nazis and ISIS. SAR criticized Hamas for using hostages in a sadistic propaganda campaign, highlighting the recent videos of emaciated captivities, including Aviatar David, who was forced to dig his own grave. He also defended Israel's efforts to allow humanitarian aid into Gaza, saying no other country at war has done as much. SAR also condemned nations that are during this sensitive hostage negotiations chose to pressure Israel and recognize a Palestinian state. Let's listen into what the Israeli foreign minister had to say.
I came to the United Nations today because our hostages are still being starved and tortured by Hamas and Islamic Jihad in the dungeons of Gaza. I came here to put the issue of the hostages front and center on world stage. They cannot be forgotten. The world has been turned upside down. There are countries that acted also in this building to pressure Israel instead of Hamas during sensitive days in the negotiations by attacking Israel, campaigning against Israel, and their announcement on a recognition of the virtual Palestinian state. They gave Hamas free gifts and an incentive to continue.
Meanwhile, at the UNSC, senior United Nations official has warned that there is no military solution to the conflict in Gaza. UN Secretary General Miroslav Jenca said the situation in the enclave is horrifying and called for a complete and permanent ceasefire, the release of all hostages, and unrestricted humanitarian access. Let's listen into what UN Assistant Secretary General for Europe, Central Asia, and the Americas, Miroslav Jenca, had to say.
There is no military solution to the conflict in Gaza or the broader Israeli-Palestinian conflict. We must establish political and security frameworks that can relieve the humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza, start early recovery and reconstruction, address the legitimate security concerns of Israelis and Palestinians, and secure an end to Israel's unlawful occupation and achieve a sustainable two-state solution. Mr. President, the latest reports regarding Prime Minister Netanyahu's possible decision to expand Israel's military operations through the entire Gaza Strip, if true, are deeply alarming. This would risk catastrophic consequences for millions of Palestinians and could further endanger the lives of the remaining hostages in Gaza.
In a related development, Gaza's Civil Defense Agency has raised Gaza's Tuesday's death toll from Israeli attacks to 68 people. Spokesperson Mahmoud Basal said that 56 people were killed by Israeli gunfire near 8 distribution points, and another 12 died in airstrikes. Now we go back to our guest discussion with Madhav Nalapat. He's an editorial director at the Sunday Guardian. Thank you, Madhav Nalapat, for staying with us. Now, how do you interpret Israeli Foreign Minister Gideon Saar's comparison of Hamas's action to those of the Nazis and ISIS?
Well, I'd like to say that India has always believed in a two-state solution, and that's the way forward. But then, for that, precondition is that Palestine needs to accept the right of Israel to exist, and the right of the Jewish people to live as normal a life as other peoples do. So I think these are conditions that need to be met. These are conditions that are very far from being met at this point in time. So yes, I mean, what the UN Assistant Secretary General has said is absolutely correct, but it's a long way from the situation on the ground, and that is the problem. And I don't see much sign of situation on the ground changing for the better anytime soon. I mean, I've been on this channel multiple times, way back, and I've stuck to my view that I don't see that the light at the end of the tunnel. I I mean, others see only the light. I don't see the light at the end of the tunnel yet. It's a long, dark tunnel, and we are still in that tunnel of darkness. And of course, the people of Gaza are paying a terrible price, a really terrible price. There's no doubt about it. And the price they are paying by being ruled by a terror organization.
Yes.
So, of course,
Madam Nalapat, we are running out of time here for this discussion. Thank you very much for always joining us and sharing your insight. Now we move on. Brazil is pushing back diplomatically as the U.S. prepares to impose steep tariffs on Brazilian goods. President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva has said that his government would use all available resources, including the World Trade Organization, to defend its interests. Lula has called the day the tariffs take effect the most regrettable in U.S.-Brazil relations, but added he would not reach out to President Trump, saying Trump refuses to talk. Let's listen into what Brazilian president had said.
Para comercial não, porque não quer falar. Mas pode ficar certo, Marina. Eu vou ligar para o Trump para convidá-lo para vir para a COP, porque eu quero saber o que ele pensa da questão climática. Vou ter a gentileza de ligar. Vamos recorrer a todas as medidas cabíveis, a começar pelo OMC, para defender os nossos interesses. Aliás, o governo já vinha atuando para fortalecer nosso comércio exterior e gerar novas oportunidades para empresas nacionais desde antes da mudança do governo dos Estados Unidos.
Meanwhile, Brazil's Foreign Minister Mauro Vieira has said that he told U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio that while Brazil is open to trade talks, national sovereignty is not negotiable. Behind the scenes, Brazil is holding off on direct retaliation. Reports say the government is focused instead on delivering a relief package for industries hit hardest by the tariffs. Let's listen into what Brazilian Foreign Minister Mauro Vieira has said.
Os mais de 200 anos de relações amistosas entre os dois países, disse ao secretário de Estado, na reunião que mantive com ele no dia 30 de março último, que estamos abertos a discutir os temas comerciais. Ressaltei, por outro lado, que a integridade das instituições constituídas, a democracia e a soberania brasileira não são negociáveis.
This comes as Trump's executive order last week included key exemptions, sparking some of Brazil's most vulnerable sectors, easing investor concerns for now. Still, tensions remain high as between the two largest economies in the Americas. Now we're joined by Dr. Tomohiko Taniguchi. He's a former advisor to late Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. Joins us live from Tokyo. Thank you for joining us today. Good to see you. Now, with Brazil planning to use the World Trade Organization to defend its interest, what are the potential consequences for U.S.-Brazil relations?
The World Trade Organization has ceased to function for many years, and one can easily understand the anger and frustration that leaders of countries like Brazil and India have vis-a-vis the United States that has imposed unreasonable tariffs on those nations. If only the United States could make a clear picture, understandable for the rest of the world, that for the first stage, they're going to raise tariff barriers, and in the meantime, they're going to rebuild their military industrial complex, and the final goal for them is to re-establish the world order to be maintained by the United States. If that's the roadmap, the United States administration, Mr. Trump, could have made it more understandable and articulate. And right now, there seems to be no distinction whatsoever between friendly nations to the United States and unfriendly nations to the United States. If I should echo your previous guest, the distinguished editor of the Sunday Guardian, I think the main threat is not from those countries at all. It is in the Indo-Pacific. So the United States must be prepared for the confrontations economically, militarily, politically, in many ways, vis-a-vis China. We need to be told a bigger picture from the United States.
Yes. Thank you very much, Dr. Tomohiko, for sharing that. Please stay with us as we come back to you for our next discussion as well. Now, Japan has held a memorial ceremony to mark the 80th anniversary of the U.S. atomic bombing of Hiroshima. About 55,000 participants, including international guests from a record 120 countries and regions, observed a moment of silence at 8:15 a.m. local time, the exact time when the uranium bomb was dropped on Hiroshima by the U.S. 80 years ago, to commemorate the souls of thousands of victims. After laying a wreath at the cenotaph, Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba urged all countries to make efforts towards nuclear disarmament. Here's what he had to say.
今から80年前の今日、一発の原子爆弾が炸裂し、十数万とも言われる尊い命が失われました。一命を取り留めた方々にも、筆舌に尽くしがたい苦難の日々をもたらしました。内閣総理大臣として、原子爆弾の犠牲となられた方々の御霊に対し、故に謹んで哀悼の誠を捧げます。人々の夢や明るい未来が瞬時に容赦なく奪われたことに言葉を失いました。広島、長崎にもたらされた惨禍を決して繰り返してはなりません。非核三原則を堅持しながら、核兵器のない世界に向けた国際社会の取り組みを主導することは、唯一の戦争被爆国である我が国の使命であります。
The uranium bomb had instantly killed about 78,000 people, and by the end of 1945, the number of dead, including from radiation exposure, reached about 140,000. The US had also dropped a second atomic bomb on Nagasaki on August 9th. Meanwhile, on the streets leading up to the Peace Memorial Park, there were small protests calling for the abolition of nuclear weapons. Now we go back to our guest discussion with Dr. Tomohiko Taniguchi. He's a former advisor to late Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. Thank you, Dr. Taniguchi, for staying with us. Now, do you have any message for our guests, for our viewers here, looking at 80 years from two atomic bombs blasting in Japan?
The first thing I have to say is that it is only in India parliamentarians have, without exception, given prayer to the victims of A-bombs either on the 6th of August or on the 9th of August each year. And many in Japan, including myself, have been deeply appreciative of that friendly and very much compassionate gesture. That's number one. Number two, it is ironic that the peace in the Indo-Pacific has been maintained by the nuclear equilibrium that was established by the United States and during the Cold War era, Russia. Now, the nuclear protection, the so-called extended deterrence, is even more important for Japan than in the past. So that's a piece of irony that we must live with, despite the fact that those two A-bombs, as you say, killed a lot of people. Prime Minister Ishiba said something like 3 no principles. 3 no's include not allowing nuclear weapons to be on the soil of Japan. And I think that's a matter of discussion, whether this no principle should be maintained or kept intact. It is, in my view, very much important for Japan to revisit that path. And I think it's even more important for that discussion to take place between the United States and Japan I, for one, I am of a view that nuclear-powered strategic submarines with nuclear attack capabilities can be allowed to be ported in one of the military ports of Japan. But Prime Minister Ishiba categorically today denied that sort of possibility, which is, I think, a troublesome statement.
Yes. Thank you very much, Dr. Tomohiko Taniguchi, for joining us and sharing your insight throughout our news. Well, that's all we have time for. We will continue to bring you more news updates from around the world.